You are looking at a hole in the ground that can keep every vegetable you grow fresh for 6 months without a single watt of electricity. Not a fridge, not a freezer, not a high-tech gadget, a root cellar, and I am going to show you exactly how to build one for around $300 using a design the Amish never stopped using. Because once you understand the physics of cool, humid, and dark, you'll know why your grandparents never paid to keep their food cold. This is the technology that kept every homestead in America fed through winter for 2 centuries before refrigeration existed, and in an era where a power grid failure can spoil a freezer full of food in 48 hours. A family in Pennsylvania just proved it still works flawlessly, because the ground beneath your feet holds a temperature that never changes, and the Amish never forgot how to use it. But here is what most people get wrong. They think you need a basement, a hillside, or a $10,000 excavation. You do not. 4 feet below the surface, the Earth holds a steady temperature between 50 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit every single day of the year. In January, that is warmer than the air outside. In July, it is cooler. Raise the humidity to around 90%, and you have nature's perfect refrigerator. No compressor, no thermostat, no power bill. The science is brutally simple. Vegetables are still alive after you harvest them. They respire, burning stored sugars. Every degree warmer than 40 degrees accelerates that process, stealing texture, flavor, and nutrition. A root cellar slams the brakes on respiration, using nothing but dirt and air. My grandfather knew this. His grandfather knew it. Every homestead in America knew it before the 1930s. But somewhere between the Frigidaire and the chest freezer, we forgot the single most reliable food preservation system ever invented, and we traded a hole in the ground that lasts a lifetime for an appliance that dies in a decade and costs you money every month it runs. That trade never made sense to the Amish. In Lancaster County, I met a man named Samuel who still uses the same root cellar his great-grandfather dug by hand in 1912. He stores potatoes, carrots, beets, and cabbage from October until April without a single watt. The temperature inside, a perfect 38 degrees year-round, and he built an extension last summer for less than my last grocery bill. That is the real number that should make you angry. A family of 4 can store 6 months of vegetables in a root cellar that costs roughly $300 to build yourself. Not 10,000, not 5,000, 300. The grocery equivalent of that same produce, bought week after week through winter, runs well over $2,000. The return on investment is immediate and permanent. But before you walk into your yard and start digging, you need to hear the one thing that decides whether your root cellar feeds your family or ruins an entire season of work. It is a single number that food storage manuals rarely mention, and the Amish measure it with nothing but a wet finger. That number is humidity, and more specifically, 90%. A root cellar must hold between 85 and 95% relative humidity. Drop below 80% and your carrots shrivel into rubber sticks in 2 weeks. Your potatoes turn soft. Your beets bleed dry. Every crop you put in the ground in May becomes a wrinkled, inedible loss by Thanksgiving. Most people dig a hole, toss in some vegetables, and walk away confused when everything rots or shrivels. Rot comes from too much moisture pooling without airflow. Shriveling comes from not enough. The difference between a root cellar that feeds your family for 6 months and a moldy pit that wastes an entire harvest lives in that 10-point humidity window. And the Amish don't use a digital hygrometer. They lick a finger, hold it up near the vent, and if the air bites back cold and damp without feeling wet, they know it is right. Samuel showed me his system, At the back of his cellar, a 4-inch PVC pipe runs from floor level, straight up through the soil to daylight at the front. Near the door, another pipe draws air from just below the ceiling. Cold air enters low, warm, stale air exits high. No fan, no motor, no moving parts, just the physics of convection, the same principle that makes a chimney work. That constant, silent air exchange is what prevents the ethylene gas from building up, and ethylene is the invisible killer nobody tells you about. Apples and pears release it as they ripen. Potatoes exposed to even trace amounts of ethylene will sprout in weeks, turning sweet and toxic. Cabbage and turnips will absorb it and turn bitter. 1 bushel of apples stored beside a bin of potatoes can ruin the entire crop. Samuel keeps his fruits in a completely separate corner, with a dirt partition between them. A trick his grandfather learned the hard way in 1923 after losing an entire winter's worth of spuds to a single barrel of Macintosh. This is not theory. This is the accumulated knowledge of 2 centuries of trial and error, handed down in quiet barn conversations. And what is staggering is how cheaply you can replicate it right now. The most expensive part of a root cellar is not the digging. It is not the lumber or the pipe. It is the mistake of overcomplicating a system that the earth already provides. Samuel dug his extension in 3 weekends with a shovel, some sandbags, and a salvaged steel door. He lined the floor with nothing but gravel. The gravel lets groundwater drain instead of pooling. He mortared the walls with a clay sand mix that cost him $0, because the clay came from his own back field. The roof is corrugated metal, covered with 2 feet of packed earth, and a layer of sod that insulates year-round. Total cash outlay, $287. And that includes the cost of the door he bought from a neighbor's barn teardown. But none of that matters if you put the wrong vegetables in the wrong place. And this is where even experienced gardeners get it wrong. Not everything belongs in a root cellar. Tomatoes and peppers need dry, moderate conditions, not cold and damp. Onions and garlic demand low humidity, or they mold in a month. Winter squash requires a cool, dry corner, not near the wet air intake. Your root cellar is not a single room with a single climate. It is a map of microclimates. The floor, near the cold air intake, sits at 34 degrees and 95% humidity. Perfect for carrots and beets buried in damp sand. The high shelf near the ceiling might sit at 42 degrees and 80% humidity. Exactly what cabbage and apples need. The back wall, farthest from the vent, stays coldest and dampest. That is where potatoes go, in total darkness, stacked in straw-lined bins with black plastic over the top, so they never green. 1 hour with a shovel and a thermometer, and you can map every microclimate in a 4 by 6 foot space. The year-round storage potential is longer than most people realize. Late maturing carrots, properly cured and packed in moist sawdust, can hold from October through April, 6 full months. Beets, in the same conditions, can push 7. Parsnips actually improve in flavor after a frost and sit happily in the cold dirt floor for 5 months. Cabbage, head intact and roots pulled, will hold for 6 months if you wrap it in newspaper and rotate the heads once a month. And here is the trick that floored me when Samuel showed it. You can store fresh eggs in a root cellar for 6 months without refrigeration if you turn them monthly and keep them in a sealed crock of water glass, a method the Amish have used since the 1800s, not in a fridge, in a hole in the ground. But there is a catch, And it is the one thing that makes this entire system fall apart if you ignore it. The moment you bring a warm garden crop into a cold cellar without properly curing it, condensation forms on every surface, and within 72 hours, bacterial soft rot spreads from one vegetable to the next like a chain reaction. The cure is the difference between abundance and a wheelbarrow of slime. The rule is simple and absolute. Never bring a warm root into a cold cellar. Carrots pulled from 50-degree October soil go into a bucket of damp sand in the shade for 24 hours before they ever see the cellar floor. Beets get the same treatment, plus their tops are twisted off, not cut, leaving a half-inch stem so they don't bleed. Potatoes demand a full 7 days of curing in darkness at 55 degrees and high humidity, which heals every tiny scrape the shovel left behind and seals the skin. Skip that week, and your potato bin becomes a science experiment in soft rot before Christmas. Onions need 2 full weeks hanging in a warm, dry barn with a fan on them until the necks are tight and papery. Garlic, the same 2 weeks, then braided and hung from the ceiling in the driest corner of the cellar. Winter squash sits in the sun for 10 days until the skin hardens enough that your thumbnail cannot dent it. A single uncured butternut squash in that bin will weep condensation, collapse, and take every other squash down with it within 2 weeks. None of this is complicated. It is just specific. And specificity is what the modern food system erased. When every house had a root cellar, every child knew that a soft onion in December meant Dad didn't cure it right. Today, the knowledge has been replaced by a produce aisle that never closes and a refrigerator that hums 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, until the power goes out and you are throwing away $300 worth of food on day 2 of a blackout. That is the trade we made without ever being asked. But the Amish asked, and they answered with a design that costs less than the food it saves in a single winter. Samuel's root cellar is 42 degrees in August and 36 in February. The swing is 6 degrees across an entire year. His modern refrigerator swings 4 every time his kids open the door. Now, multiply that stability across 6 months. A carrot stored in his sand bin in November is crisper in March than one you bought at the grocery store last week, because that grocery carrot was harvested in California, washed in chlorinated water, trucked 2,000 miles in a refrigerated trailer that cycled between 34 and 41 degrees every time the driver opened the doors, and then sat under fluorescent lights for 3 days before you picked it up. Samuel's carrot went from the ground to damp sand in 45 minutes. There is no comparison, and yet the one piece nobody talks about is that most vegetables sold in garden catalogs today were never bred to be stored. They were bred to look perfect after 1,000 miles on a truck. The varieties that hold 6 months in a root cellar are the ones your great-grandparents grew. Late flat Dutch cabbage, Detroit dark red beets, Danvers half-long carrots, Kennebec potatoes. These are not fancy names. They are the workhorses of a lost American kitchen. The Amish seed savers in Lancaster still grow them, selecting year after year for storage quality. That is the hidden half of the equation. You cannot build a perfect root cellar and fill it with hybrid vegetables designed for a supermarket shelf and expect them to hold. The genetics matter as much as the temperature. Now, before I show you the exact steps to build this for under $300 on a quarter-acre lot, I need to point you somewhere, because the question I get more than any other after these episodes is where to find all of it in one place. The building plan, the crop chart, the humidity map, the variety list. I put it together It is called the root cellar system. The link is in the description. But stay here, because what I am about to show you is the moment everything changes. It is the first time you open that cellar door in February and pull out a cabbage that still has January frost on its outer leaves, but is sweet and crisp at the heart. And the number that makes it all possible is one nobody talks about: 40. 40 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the line between food that lives and food that dies. At 41 degrees, a potato's respiration rate doubles. The cells burn through their stored energy. The flesh softens, and every passing week steals another layer of flavor until you are eating cardboard in March. At 39 degrees, that same potato enters a state near suspended animation. Respiration drops so low it barely registers. The skin stays tight. The starch holds. 6 months later, it is still a potato. Not a single vitamin lost. The difference is 1 degree. Samuel's cellar sits at 38 degrees from the first frost until the daffodils break ground. He achieves that with 3 things: depth, earth, and ventilation. 4 feet down. The soil temperature never drops below 50. The trick is pulling that 50-degree air down to 38, then holding it there. Samuel does it with a cold air intake that opens only at night in the fall, pulling in 35-degree air until the cellar drops to 38, then closes during the day. Once winter locks in, the ground insulates the space so well that the temperature barely moves. His dirt floor wicks excess moisture down into the subsoil, preventing puddles. The gravel base he laid in 1992 has not been touched since. No dehumidifier, no heater, no power, only physics. And this is what I came here to show you. The cheapest build path is not $1,000 concrete bunker. It is an Earthbag root cellar that you can build in a single week with a shovel, some polyfeed sacks, and a roll of barbed wire. You dig a trench 4 feet wide and 6 feet long. You fill the sacks with the same dirt you just excavated, stack them like bricks, and lay a strand of barbed wire between every course to lock the bags in place. The walls go up 4 feet above ground level. You build a roof with salvaged lumber, a sheet of metal roofing, and 2 feet of packed earth on top. A single vent pipe at the back, another at the front near the door. The door itself can be an old exterior door from a salvage yard or a homemade insulated box. The materials cost for a 4 by 6 foot cellar, the size that feeds a family of 4 for 6 months, came to $294 when I priced it last month. That includes the sacks, the wire, the vents, and the door. The dirt is free, and the food that comes out of it in February is something you have to see to believe. Samuel pulled back a black plastic cover and lifted a Kennebec potato from a straw-lined bin. It was firm, cold, with no sprouts, no green skin, no soft spots. He cut it open with a pocket knife. The flesh was creamy white and wept a little starch water. He handed me half. It smelled like earth and sweetness. That potato was harvested in September. It was now the first week of March, 5 months in the dark, at 38 degrees and 90% humidity. And it was indistinguishable from a potato pulled that morning. The same shelf held a crate of Detroit dark red beets packed in damp sand. He lifted one, brushed it off, and the skin was smooth as polished wood. It had lost no weight, no color, no firmness. Beside it, a row of late flat Dutch cabbage heads wrapped in newspaper, each one heavier than a bowling ball. He peeled back the outer leaves to show me the heart, pale green, tight, crisp, with no sign of wilt. In the corner, a 5-gallon ceramic crock filled with a solution of sodium silicate and water. He lifted the lid and pulled out an egg, cracked it into a bowl. The yolk stood tall and orange. The white held its shape. That egg was laid the previous August, 7 months ago, and it looked like it came from under a hen that morning. This is not survivalism. This is what a kitchen looked like before the grid, and the Amish never stopped building them because they never trusted a system that charges you rent every month for cold air. But there is one detail I have not mentioned, the one surprise that Samuel saved for the end. His root cellar has no thermometer, no hygrometer, no sensor of any kind. When I asked how he knows the conditions are right, he pointed to a wooden crate pushed against the back wall. He lifted the lid and showed me a dozen potatoes sitting in a tray of damp sand, uncovered. "These are my canaries," he said. "If the air is too dry, they shrivel first. If it is too warm, they sprout. If I see them moving, I adjust the vent. A potato is a living instrument, and it never lies. The oldest technology in the room was not the dirt or the pipe or the wooden bins. It was paying attention, and that is the part of this story that keeps me thinking. Long after I left Lancaster County, we outsourced cold to a machine, and in doing so, we outsourced an entire way of being present with our food. Samuel does not check an app to know if his carrots are still good. He walks to the back of his barn, lifts a lid, and looks at a potato. That potato tells him everything he needs to know about temperature, humidity, and time. It is a relationship, not a transaction. You will never find this system in a big box store. Nobody will sell you a subscription to dirt. The knowledge only survives in quiet places, in barns and basements and the patient hands of people who never stopped trusting a 4,000-year-old idea. If that kind of self-reliance appeals to you, I have put the full build plan, the variety list, and the crop storage chart into one place. The link is in the description. But the real question I want to leave you with is this. If you dug that hole and filled it with 6 months of food this fall, what is the first vegetable you would want to pull out in February? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one, and what you tell me decides what we cover next. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.